Hello, I'm Levi, the Garage Movie Guy. Welcome to my nightmare. Since American Horror Story just wrapped up its 8th season, I thought it would be fun to dive into the show by looking at the seasons and ranking them in order of, my enjoyment of the series. If you're not familiar with it, American Horror Story is a horror anthology series. This means that each season is a new setting with new characters, and often the same actors are brought back to play different characters. Occasionally the seasons are sort of bound to one another through certain storylines, but for the most part they're separate and they can be seen as such. That's one reason I think it would be fun to rank these, because they're so different in their tone and their story that it's very easy for me to pick out which ones I enjoyed and which ones I might not have enjoyed as much. If you're a fan of horror, I recommend you watch the show, but you have to go in knowing what you're gonna get. The show was developed by Ryan Murphy, the same guy who brought us Glee and Scream Queens, so you can expect that the tone of the show occasionally is gonna be a little crazy and insane, but he does bring in a lot of aspects from horror movies and even some true life crime into the stories. He weaves them together in a way that they sort of make sense by the end of the season. Sometimes plot threads just are left dangling, or he leads you down a path and then just immediately yanks you in the other direction. But after 8 years of watching this show, I've just grown to enjoy that. It's one that I watch with my wife. We've watched it since the first episode aired, and we watch it live each season as it is on TV, and we have a lot of fun discussing it and talking about all the crazy cameos that they have. So without further ado, I guess we'll get right into my ranking of American Horror Story. Now, before I get into this countdown, I want to say I know this series is definitely an adult series and it's not meant for kids, but my countdown is rated about a PG. I don't talk about anything too extreme, and I'm not going to give away any major plot points. So if you haven't seen the series and you're sort of interested in it, want to know what the seasons are about, then I suggest you keep listening, and I want to hear down below what you think about all these seasons and if I've piqued your interest enough to check any of them out. And with that, let's get into my ranking of the first 8 seasons of American Horror Story. Now, I suspect the season that's at the bottom of my list in slot number 8 is at the bottom of a lot of American Horror Story fans' lists, and that's because the season was a mess, and it was a lot of Ryan Murphy trying to make political statements that I guess were valid for him, but kind of were a little too immediate and a bit too obvious and literal to really hit the mark. Of course, I'm talking about season 7, American Horror Story Cult. And I'm not gonna really recount the story in detail of each season, because honestly, I can't remember the details of a lot of seasons because I haven't watched these since they first aired. But the central story was a present day story that took place in the USA. I think it was during the election or right after the election when Donald Trump got elected. And I feel like Ryan Murphy was making comments about both sides by presenting the characters in the series sort of in a ridiculous light, but there were all these horrific things happening under the surface, and it was kind of an interesting view on what was and still is happening to our country. But the story was just so disjointed, and I really didn't care about any of the characters that I can remember. But enough of American Horror Story Cult. We'll move on to my number 7 slot, and this one is reserved for season 6, Roanoke. I feel like Roanoke had the bones of a good story, and I kind of respect what Ryan Murphy was trying to do, because the season sort of in the first half focuses on a reality show, reality-ish recreation show, where they're talking about what happened at this house in the countryside where these people went and all this weird stuff happened. So there's the group of actors that are at the house, and things happen to and around them. And then at some point, the original actual people who experienced it come back to the house. And there's also some history of witches in the area and something sort of in the vein of The Witch, the film. But this season didn't go to the bottom of my list because there were some moments that were really interesting and fun to watch. But overall, I just didn't feel a lot for this season, other than a couple of moments where I really felt for the characters. Once again, I didn't care about the characters on screen. And I thought that the storytelling style of presenting this recreation show being shot and then coming back to real world issues with people who had experienced this was a little ham-fisted, and it made this season of American Horror Story even more disjointed than it usually is. I guess that's it for my number 7 slot, Roanoke. Now for number 6, we're gonna go down south to Florida and we're gonna talk about American Horror Story Freak Show. This was season 4 of the series, and this season was a lot of ups and a lot of downs. There were some things I really enjoyed about the series. There was a character called Dandy who was a very intriguing character, and also, as the name would imply, it sort of focuses on this circus freak show group of people that are sort of banding together as a family. But I feel like the story lost a little bit of its way because we're, on the one hand, we're getting the story that's kind of the X-Men allegory of, these people are freaks and they're set apart from society, and no one respects them, and they think they're horrible people that do horrible things. But on the other hand, they do horrible things to people, and sometimes they do that in an undeserved way. And, I felt for these people for being ostracized from the community because they looked different or because they were a little different than people that were around them. But in the end, some of them were just not nice people. And I had trouble sort of reconciling that, I guess, in my enjoyment of the series. But I think this was the season we got Twisty the Clown, which is, I think, one of the more interesting characters. This season also has one of the craziest accents I've ever heard on TV or movies or anywhere. It's Kathy Bates. I can't remember what the accent she's doing. I think it's like a Philadelphia accent, but gosh, it's weird. And apparently it's very accurate. From what I heard and what I read at the time that it was on. But man, it's weird to see. And I guess that's one good reason to watch this season, is just to see Kathy Bates' performance. It's something else. But it was an interesting season with interesting characters, and it was fun to watch, but not quite as enjoyable as some of my other picks. So that's why Freak Show Season 4 is at my number 6 slot. Now, as I near the middle of my countdown in slot number 5, I'm going to go to the end, the very end, the end of the world, American Horror Story Apocalypse. This was the latest season, season 8 of the show, and I thought about putting this one higher, but the rest of the seasons were just too good to let this one slip above them. But I have to say, I haven't had this much fun with this series in a long time, and a lot of that is because he brought back very definite elements from other seasons in this season. He tied back the witches from Coven, which are a fan favorite. I know a lot of people, that's their favorite season. And he sort of developed the lore of these witches and did a little bit of world building in his American Horror Story universe that has sort of grown. And they went back to the murder house from season 1 and revisited some of those characters. And it was just a lot of fun, and I liked the climax of the series and the final episode. I didn't think they would be able to tie everything together by the final episode, but they did, and there was a triumphant return of one particular character that was especially enjoyable, and if you've seen the episode, you know who it is, and you probably felt like I did if you're an American Horror Story fan. And because this latest season had all those fun elements, that's why it's going in the middle of my countdown at number 5. That's American Horror Story Apocalypse. Now, as we step over the middle of the countdown and go for 4, 3, 2, and 1, this is where I had a lot of trouble figuring out the order in which I wanted to place the seasons. For me, these are definitely the better half of the show. I feel like these are more cohesive seasons, and they are also just more enjoyable to watch. And that's why they're all at the top of my countdown. And I really did have a lot of trouble figuring out these, especially 4, 3, and 2. But for number 4, I decided to go with the second season of American Horror Story, Asylum. I do feel like Asylum is the most, creepy season of all. I don't want to say scariest or most horrific, but it definitely gives you a creepy vibe throughout the season. And it does mostly take place in an asylum, and it deals with some characters that are both in the asylum, and there's a reporter that's trying to do a report on the asylum. There are other things to like about this series especially the performances by all of the actors. I feel like this is some of the best acting in the series overall and some of the most enjoyable performances. Zachary Quinto is great in his role, and Jessica Lange, I especially liked her in this season in her role as Sister Mary Eunice. Also, Joseph Fiennes was in this as Monsignor Riley, I believe it was, and it's kind of funny having seen him in this and now seeing him in The Handmaid's Tale, each role being an oddly religious man being a weirdo, and his performance was very good in Asylum, and in some ways kind of similar to his performance in The Handmaid's Tale. So if you're looking for just a creepy season of television and you want sort of that Halloween spooky vibe at any time of the year, then I recommend you watch Asylum. And also there's a nice little musical number in there from Jessica Lange. Because Ryan Murphy comes from Glee and he likes musicals, there are musical numbers in just about every season of this show. This has one of my favorite ones with Jessica Lange, and you just have to see it. It's a lot of fun. And those are just some of the reasons that American Horror Story Asylum falls in my number 4 slot. Now for my number 3 slot, this was a season that was also a lot of fun, and it wasn't quite as creepy, but I'm talking about season 3, American Horror Story Coven. As I said before, this is in the number 1 slot for a lot of people, and I can totally understand that. And, you know, maybe if I went back and watched all of these seasons, my rankings would move all over the place, but Coven is definitely a season that I want to go back and watch at some point because there's so much going on, and it's an interesting kind of story that I like, which is a bunch of people coming together with their own unique abilities and powers. And a lot of people at the time that it was airing compared it to X-Men because there's this school for gifted young ladies, and they are witches. But it's very reminiscent of Professor X bringing all of the mutants together so that they can hone their powers and not be shunned by society. But there are also some historical touches that are very enjoyable. Kathy Bates' character is a horrific woman, but her part is very well played in this. And of course, we got the introduction of Angela Bassett as Marie Laveau, the queen of voodoo. And I think it goes without saying, when Angela Bassett is in something, it's amazing. If you haven't seen American Horror Story, then you should watch Coven. And another aspect about this season that I really enjoyed were just the characters. There were a lot of characters that were likable. For the most part, all the witches were people that you could relate to and you could understand their motives, and they were very different in the ways that they came to know about their powers and came to Madame Robichaud's school. And it's interesting to see them work together and sometimes sort of work against each other in the things that they're doing. And as I mentioned before, they did come back in season 8, this most recent season, Apocalypse. And I feel like Apocalypse was made better because of Coven and because of those characters that they got to bring in. It sort of elevated this most recent season. And this season also gave us, in my opinion, and my wife's, I'm sure, one of the best lines from American Horror Story, which we say to each other all the time, from Miss Jessica Lange in the final episode. Naughty pie! Oh, and I can't forget the White Witch, Stevie Nicks. Stevie Nicks is in this season as Stevie Nicks. She's a witch in Coven. And because of all those great reasons, American Horror Story Coven is in my number 3 slot. It's also season 3, Power of 3. It was meant to be. Okay, now things get real. My number 1 and number 2 slots. This was difficult. As I said, from slot 4 to slot 1, any of these could probably move around at any moment, especially 3 through 1. But these next 2 seasons are, in my mind, and at least in my recollection of watching the series, some of the best times I've had with the series, and for me, some of the most impactful scenes and emotions that I've had with the series. So now we come to my number 2 slot, and for that, we're gonna go out west to LA to The Hotel. And this was season 5, American Horror Story Hotel. And going back and sort of assessing my feelings of all the seasons and how I felt watching them and how I felt in retrospect, Hotel just kept bubbling up to the top. And I can't really put my finger on one specific reason that it keeps coming back up. This season just had some kind of vibe that really resonated with me. It was this sort of old Hollywood glamour and sort of an intersection of all these disparate people in this one hotel, and they would come to this hotel and they'd get trapped there. I will warn you though, season 5 has some of the most disturbing acts and scenes that you will see in this entire series. So be warned, and it starts full throttle in episode 1. So if you make it past episode 1 of this, you'll probably be good for the rest of this season. But when you get past that, the story in Hotel is very vast, and there are so many characters that are introduced in this season that it's kind of hard to keep track of them in my mind, since it's been, I guess, 3 years since I've seen it. But there are some that are so crystallized in my mind that I feel like I just watched this series yesterday. One of those is Liz Taylor, and that was just an amazing character portrayed by, what's his name? Russell Edgington. That's the guy he played in True Blood. I can't remember his name. Let me look it up. Dennis O'Hare. He's in a few seasons of this show, and he's kind of the character actor, I guess, because he sort of melts into his role, and you don't notice him, you notice the character. And Liz Taylor is a great representation of that. She's a glamorous wannabe movie star, dresses in fancy dresses, makes cocktails, is very sassy, and that was a great character. But also I liked the proprietor of the hotel, James March, played by Evan Peters. I think by far this is Evan Peters' best role in this series. He plays the original owner of the hotel. He built the hotel, and he kind of built the hotel to be this weird spirit prison place. He's actually based on a real person that I can't remember the guy's name, but I think he owned hotels around, or a hotel in Chicago maybe. But he's this loud, boisterous character, and he has this accent. I can't really do the accent, but Evan Peters does it very well, and it's fun to see him in that role. He's got this little mustache, and he's in a nice suit, and he's got his hair slicked back, and he talks like this, like someone in the Northeast in the 20s. And it's juxtaposed against all these horrible things happening in this hotel, and people getting murdered left and right, and their souls just being tortured. I know it sounds horrible, but it's a great season. And Lady Gaga plays a vampire, this sort of seductress vampire character, and she's got sort of these acolytes around her. And I completely forgot at the beginning of the season, there's this sort of murder mystery thriller type story that's kind of reminiscent of something like Seven, where there's a serial killer. Anyway, those are just some of the reasons that I put Hotel in my number 2 slot. So for those of you keeping up at home, doing the math, and that know the series, you might have guessed my number 1 season of American Horror Story is Murder House Season 1. You know, some people might find that boring. I know that some people are huge advocates of other seasons, especially Coven. I know people love that season, and I love it too. But there's something about Murder House and going back to that original sort of experience of watching that when I had never seen any other TV show like that. Grabbing all these horror tropes and throwing them together, and these historical aspects of horror, the Black Dahlia's in there. Just the feeling that this season gave me at the time, like I said, being something that I'd never really experienced, and weekly having this new, short horror movie that had to do with this through line of this family that's living in this house, and finding out about all the horrible things that happen there, and giving some body to the weird things that are happening around them, and showing you why they're happening and how they happened in the first place. For me, I just really can't beat this first season. And honestly, I think one reason this season sort of resonated with me was the school shooting scene. Unfortunately, that's still a reality that we live with today. But I grew up in the 90s in high school when Columbine happened. And I know it was really controversial when this episode aired, but unfortunately, in retrospect, it's still something that we need to address and that we need to think about. So I can understand why Ryan Murphy put it in there, and I think it gives the season some depth. And attaches it to the real world in a way that some of the other seasons really weren't able to do that. But anyway, that's American Horror Story Murder House in my #1 slot. So that's it. That's my countdown of American Horror Story season 1 through 8. I believe there's 2 more seasons that Ryan Murphy has, and then he's gonna wrap the series up, which I think is about right. I was kind of afraid things were gonna go off the rails when Cult came around and Roanoke. I thought we'd kind of lost the ball there, but fortunately, they came back around with this season 8, and I just had so much fun with this last season. That's one reason I wanted to do this countdown, because I've been thinking about the show, and if you're a fan of the show, or if you're gonna go back and watch the show, there's a podcast I recommend you listen to. It's from Bald Move. It's this husband and wife team, Aaron and Cecily, and they're just really fun to listen to. They also did a True Blood podcast, which I enjoyed. I wanna hear down below, what's your favorite season of American Horror Story? But until next time, I'm Levi, the Garage Movie Guy, saying, Naughty Pass! One more thing for those of you that have still stuck around. I know I haven't released a movie review in a really long time. I don't release them very often anymore. I apologize. I really hate that. I just don't have the time to get them put together. But I'm working on a really fun one that I'm excited to share with you. Romeo and Juliet, Baz Luhrmann's 1996 adaptation with Claire Danes, Leonardo DiCaprio. The English nerd in me and the Tarantino fan in me sort of clashed when this film came out, and it just hit my sweet spot. So can't wait to talk about that one. But anyway, go about your business. We'll come up with that review hopefully before the end of the year, because I also want to review some Christmas movies, including Ernest Saves Christmas.
Is this where the horror movie folks be?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to get that out. I promise. So see you guys next time. American Store Horror, Hairdo Mouse. Let's get in our countdown to number 8. That looks stupid. Number 8. But until next time, I'm Levi, the Garage Movie Guy, saying